This man writes, my 11-year-old son sometimes snuggles up to me in bed when he wakes up in the morning. Be glad for these years, because when they're 15, they don't usually snuggle up to you in bed. Then sometimes he says, oh, why don't I go downstairs and make you a cup of tea, bring it up for you? And I say, well, sure, that would be really nice. But then he goes downstairs, gets distracted by television or whatever, and he pretty much never brings up the cup of tea. So should I talk to him about being more responsible? That really seems like a reasonable question, but it's pretty hysterical. No, absolutely not. What he's offering is an act of kindness. It's not an act of responsibility. So it really doesn't quite make sense to hold him responsible for being loving when he promises to. He's 11 and snuggles up with you. I would treasure that and leave the cup of tea alone. No kidding. This is from a woman who is coaching a lady. We'll call her client. It's a term I never use, but just to make it distinguish her, because there's two women, and then otherwise you're saying she and she and she and her, and it gets very confusing. And her client is a supervisor at work. So this is the coach who says, a woman that my client supervises is about a month into the job, so she's pretty new. From day one, she has had a bad attitude. For example, she looks irritated when she's asked to redo a job that she didn't do correctly or she didn't finish. That is what has to be stopped immediately, as in now. You'll learn a whole lot more about that if you read Real Love in the Workplace, but here's a short version. In law enforcement, for example, they've learned that pursuing the perpetrators of major crimes, murders, assaults, robberies, really makes very little difference in the overall well-being of the community and doesn't really affect the incidence of murder. They discovered, and this is written about in a book somewhere, it was a lengthy study, that it made more difference to stop the little things. Like they started stopping breaking windows, spray painting graffiti, and so on. Little stuff, traffic violations. That made a difference, if you can imagine. Stopping the breaking of windows, demonstrating to everybody that there's just not going to be any tolerance for breaking the law anymore, actually lowered the murder rate. Same here. Your student, your client, has to stop the person she supervises every single time she has a bad attitude. It sounds like a little thing, but it's not. It's huge. Every time. And say, for example, this is just one example of words that she could use with this woman who's got a bad attitude. She says, quote, "You are obviously unhappy. Would you please put into English what you mean by your facial expression?" Well, if you're in Japan, it would be Japanese or, whatever. Would you please put into English what you mean by your facial expression or your stomping or whatever you're doing? We are going to have a happy and harmonious workplace. And if you don't want to be here, which is what you're communicating with your attitude, it might be best that you not work here, because that's what you're communicating. But working with a bad attitude is simply completely unacceptable. It spreads like a virus. It just destroys the morale of the office. The coach continues. After she's been asked to redo a job and does it, she just drops it on my client's desk without speaking, obviously irritated. Same thing. We don't allow any irritation. In all the years that I employed people in my office, I employed hundreds of people. Mistakes can be dealt with. People make mistakes, you teach them how to do it better. If they arrived at the office with no training, whatever, I didn't care. I was looking for attitude. I can teach skills. I can't teach snotty, entitled people, or it's pretty difficult in the workplace to be pleasant and willing to learn. So that's what I watched for. The coach continues. She doesn't look another superior in the eyes when being spoken to because she doesn't like her. Again, it's an intolerable form of disrespect, and it has to be brought up and dealt with. The coach, my student had been hoping that this employee would figure out that her attitude needs to change on her own by my student being kind to her. My student is delusional, right? Your student is completely delusional. People who have bad attitudes learned them from the time they were born, and there's no chance, zero, that she's going to figure out her bad attitude on her own. None. In fact, it will continue and get worse, and I promise you she has this bad attitude at home. The coach, someone with this kind of bad behavior needs to be told clearly what is and is not acceptable, yes? She needs to be told clearly and often that it cannot continue, that it's a poison. So how can my student lovingly teach her that this isn't acceptable? Well, we talked about that. The coach says, I'm thinking, one, my student must say it with no irritation, condescension, and with utter calm and confidence. Take her aside and tell her that she's going to give her some feedback to help her do her job better. Make it clear that it's for the employee's benefit that she's saying it. Very good. Good start. Number two, says the coach, tell her that no complaining or reluctance to do the work is acceptable. Yes. Zero tolerance. I told this to my employees. This attitude isn't something where you can show gradual improvement. Skills are something where you can show gradual improvement as you learn them. But attitude, not gradual improvement, complete cessation, stopping of all bad attitudes. And I did this in every company that I owned. Bad attitudes never fine. And you get like 2 chances, including this one, or you're gone. So to be clear, because I've done this a number of times, the first time somebody shows a bad attitude, I take them aside, I describe the bad attitude, I describe what a good attitude would look like, because many people don't know. No joke, not kidding. Most of these people who have a bad attitude don't even realize they have it, because that's all they lived with as children. Their parents had a bad attitude all the time. So I show them their attitude, I show them what a good attitude would look like in the circumstance that I perhaps just witnessed, and then I give them a warning and I write it down. Now, from state to state and country to country, it's different, the process you have to go through before you fire somebody, but I'm just describing the process that you have to go through in Georgia. So if your policy is different in your country, well, too bad, you figure it out. Then the second time that they have a bad attitude, this is the same person who had a bad attitude the first time, I do the same thing. I describe what they did. I describe what a good attitude would look like, but I tell them this warning is the last one. And the next time there won't be a warning. So they only get warned twice. The third time, I simply take their keys and have them escorted from the building immediately. It's not worth keeping somebody like that. Ruins the morale of other employees, drives away customers, vendors, horrible effect. Coach says, number 3, I could give her specific examples of what she does that need to stop and what an acceptable attitude would look like. Good, we talked about that. 4, tell her what the consequences are if she doesn't stop. Yeah, easy, we talked about that too. If the employee begins to argue or justify, what does my client say? This one's easy because I've been through this one a number of times. Almost never, when you talk to somebody about a bad attitude, do they say, why, I didn't realize I was having a bad attitude. Thank you so much for telling me that my attitude sucks. Nobody does that. they start to argue and justify, well, I was only doing this and I did fill in the blank. It's just all blah, 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 blah. You say, I'm not asking you if you have a bad attitude. I'm the supervisor here. So I get to determine what a bad attitude is. I'm telling you that you have one. You have one more warning left, and after that warning, you'll be fired. So you can excuse yourself all you want to, but here's the consequence. If you have questions about what a good attitude looks like, fine. But if you keep making excuses, you're pretty much describing the reasons you're going to do it again the next time. So then we're going to get to the second warning, and then you're going to get fired, and then you're going to be surprised. So when I fire you, I'm not going to care what your excuses are. I have seen this fail very rarely. In all the hundreds of people that I've employed, I've had to fire a tiny, tiny handful because the whole workplace was happy. And bad attitudes stick out, and people notice that. They notice they're the only one whining and complaining. You can't afford it. So tell that to your client. This is from a mother who is in the process of potty training a 3-year-old. She taught the kid to pee in the toilet, but he just decided he didn't want to poop in the toilet. Who knows why? So I recommended that she make him do all the work. So each time he poops in his pants, he has to take his pants off. He has to pick up the poop with toilet paper, put it in the toilet. He has to take his clothes into the dirty clothes hamper, put on new clothes. He has to do all the work. She writes, he still hasn't learned to poop on the potty, so he poops in his underwear. When I notice we go to the bathroom together, he needs to pull down his pants and underwear, pick up the poop with toilet paper, flush it down the toilet, put the dirty clothes in the dirty laundry, get new clothes, put them on, and wash his hands. The only thing I do is wipe his butt, which at age 3 you kind of have to because, well, they do a pretty terrible job. I can't resist. They do a kind of half-assed job. So this takes maybe 10 minutes. Today, he really didn't want to pull down his underwear. He said, I don't want to see the poop. I said, well, nobody likes poop, but he still needs to go in the toilet. And finally he said, okay, I'm going to leave now, and you let me know when you're ready to pull down your underwear. I just didn't know what else to do to get him to do it. So a minute later, I hear some noises. I go to check on him. He'd taken off his underwear, rolled the poop over right by the door, so I had to push the poop with the door to get in the bathroom. I ended up stepping on it, slipping. Anyway, there's poop everywhere. Anybody who's raised kids have had experiences like this. He cleaned most of it up, and I cleaned up after too. None of this was on purpose on his part. No, I believe that. He had actually just done what I'd said. But I'm starting to think that this whole process is getting kind of tiring for me. Sometimes twice a day, needing to take him over to the bathroom, making sure he picks up the poop, and then he resists, or maybe this is just a part of parenting. This is just part of parenting for you. And pay attention. Children only repeat behaviors when they're either rewarded for them, like whining, crying, nagging, begging, resisting, or when the consequences are not unpleasant enough. So apparently, the process that you're going through is not yet unpleasant enough for him. So now you kick it up a notch. Now he doesn't get to pick up the poop with toilet paper. Now he has to use his hand. Oh my, he's really going to hate this, which is the whole point, that he hates it. And if he refuses, you tell him he can just stay in the bathroom all day long until he does it. And he has to wash with soap and water his underwear before he just pitches them in the dirty clothes. See, you just made the process considerably more work and considerably less pleasant. That's how consequences are supposed to work. If a kid doesn't mind them, it's not a consequence. They don't care. It's just part of the game. Mom says, he knows that he could poop in the potty and avoid all that work, but he just says that he prefers it that way. Do I need to trust that eventually he'll figure it out? That he doesn't want to do all that work? How can I make this less convenient for him without poop getting spread everywhere? Do just what I said. And if he ever does spread it everywhere, then he has to clean up all of it. You said that you helped. Mistake. He has to do all the work associated with not pooping in the toilet. Mother concludes with, I feel like I'm behind every little thing he needs to do. Okay, now pull down your pants. Okay, now pick up the poop. Okay, now bend over so I can wipe you. And I'm thinking that one thing I could do is let him take more control over the process, like asking him, so what do we do next? That actually doesn't work very well, because when you say, what do we do next? They have this gloriously stupefied look. I don't know. Rather than commanding every little step, you say. He knows the steps, so what do you think? What am I doing wrong? So we first talked about how to make it more unpleasant. And then you don't tell him what to do anymore. 0 from now on. You just stand there. And if he looks to you for direction, you say, you know what's next. Just keep going. And then you don't even say, you know what's next anymore. You just go, keep it going. Keep it going. When he asks for toilet paper for the poop, you go, no. Kids keep doing the wrong thing. Again, only if it's rewarded or it's not unpleasant enough. You make it unpleasant enough, he'll quit this. Really, pretty soon. New subject. My question. I just spoke to a real love friend who's about 45, who has a fear of talking in a group when it comes around for his time to talk. He's also aware of this from not getting approval from his parents, but he's still in fear of their disapproval. His not speaking comes from his mother saying things like, well, have you got a job yet? You have bills to pay. This is, by the way, his mother who's speaking to him as a 45-year-old. This is tough for him because he's not yet at the point where he doesn't care about the past comments that she's been making since he was a teenager. So that would be 30 years of him asking him if he has a job. But he wants not to care. He wants to feel free to speak up. Well, if you're helping him, you got to help him to speak up in group. He has to speak up. You call on him in group. It's a common mistake that group leaders make to wait for people to speak. If somebody wants to come to a group that I'm running twice and not say anything, I don't care. But after twice, what are you doing there unless you're going to speak? Really, you're taking up valuable space and it's time to talk. That's why you're there. If he's not in your group, then you practice with him what he'll say in his group and you hold him responsible for it. This is life-saving that he speak up. It's too important to ignore. She continues, as a start, I made a suggestion that he lovingly make a request of his mother and ask her, would she be willing not to make the critical and demanding and derogatory comments to him, because he lives with her at 45. Well, actually, he kind of has to speak to her. But he also has to be speaking up in group. It's not enough just to ask her to stop. It's essential. Now, pay attention to this. Why is it essential that he speak to his mother? To stop her comments? A little, but largely because he needs to practice being a human being as opposed to being a little boy, instead of being an object for her to abuse. You see, every time he lets her grill him or criticize him, he doesn't realize it, she doesn't either, but he feels smaller. He feels less worthwhile. to the point where now at 45, he doesn't feel like he can speak up at all. And it happened because of all the times he didn't dare do it. So this is very important. It has to stop right now. The lady who's writing says, so what could he say? This is just an example of a possibility. There isn't just an answer. He could say, Mom, I would really like to have a good relationship with you, but there is something you do that you probably don't realize that you do, and it's really hurting our relationship. You criticize things about me, like X and Y and Z, name some things. You're telling me a lot that you don't approve of how I'm living my life, and I really, really don't like it. I feel small. I feel like I don't want to be around you at all. I can't stop you from doing this, but if you keep doing it, I will leave the room when you do. I won't put up with it anymore. If you do it enough, then I'll quit talking to you entirely, possibly for months. The woman who's writing, let's see, says she will, I'm sorry. I'm continuing what I'm saying here. So she will, the mother will attempt to interrupt that monologue. It's pretty much a guarantee because she's used to controlling him. If she even opens her mouth, he has to put up his hand and say, this is not a discussion. I'm telling you something important and you need to listen until I'm finished. Then what? First, he tells her the above, what we just talked about. 2, if she criticizes or asks the intrusive questions anyway, he has to follow up on what he said and leave the room. If she does it again, he raises his hand and repeats what he said the first time, the monologue, and asks her, do you want to leave the room or do you want me to leave the room? The coach says, he said to me, the 45-year-old man, I'm not sure I can do this because that means I want to change her, and that is not loving. Oh, wrong. Listen carefully. Notice that in all the things that I've recommended he say, he's not changing her. In fact, he even said, I'm not going to make you stop doing this. He's simply telling her what he doesn't like, which he gets to do. That's not changing her. And he's telling her what he will do if she continues. So all he's doing is describing what he's going to do. He's not making her stop anything. He said that what he really wants is for her to say these unkind things, in other words, not stop her, and for him just not to care. That's what the coach said. So the guy, what he's really hoping for, instead of controlling her, is that he just won't care about the unkind things. Impossible. She is his mother, and he's far too wounded at this point for that plan to succeed. So he has to, 1, talk in group for his own healing, and 2, stop the continued wounding from his mother. I can't count how many people I have taken through this exact process, and it works. Either the parent stops being critical, controlling, insulting, belittling, demeaning, or the child learns to speak up and realizes, I don't have to stay around while they do this. I did this just the other day with a man who was, probably 30 and living with his parents, and his father is always making these kind of comments, and he said to his father almost exactly what I just prescribed here that the 45-year-old man say to his mother. And the next time I Skyped with him, it was like light poured through the screen. It was like there was a halo around this kid's head. He said, I asked him how he was doing, which was kind of a stupid question, because he was alive. He said, I just feel so much stronger, and I don't know why. And I said, well, did you tell your father what we talked about? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, has your father quit criticizing you and belittling you? Yeah. Well, that might be it. Yeah, that just might be it. We need to find a source of love other than from the people who are belittling us, And then we need to stop the belittling. We need to leave the situation. Sometimes we need to leave the house and just simply not associate with those people. New subject. A man wrote to me and he said, I've been thinking about how different my life is now with real love in it. There's less fear, more joy, more peace, more confidence. I recalled then the words from a recent memorial service for a fellow church member. He was an extraordinary character, well known for his love of the outdoors and his generosity with time and labor and money, and generosity with his stories of spiritual experiences and mountain climbing adventures. One person testified as to how he had said that he had traveled the world restlessly doing many different things, and how happy he was when he found his wife and her unconditional love. This man, the one they were having the funeral service for, suddenly gave up his wandering and mountain climbing and lived a much more domestic life. He had said that love was all he had ever really been searching for as he traveled all over the world, and he poured himself into appreciating and loving his wife and his daughter and loving other people. I can't tell you how many people I know who travel because they say, well, you know, it broadens them, or people who work hard because, well, it fulfills them, or people who have hobbies that just become obsessive because, well, they like them. And all anybody's ever looking for is to feel unconditionally loved and to share it with the people around them. And once they find it, they discover that all the other things that they used to do just kind of don't have the same allure. They just don't mean as much. I'm going to be speaking in a few days at the funeral of a friend. And he spent his life doing things, as Frank Sinatra said, his way. I did it my way. The thing is, doing it his way didn't include other people. And as a result, although I enjoyed my time with him, when I speak about him at the funeral, there's not much to say, because he didn't have close relationships with people. And he always thought there would be more time, followed by diabetes and pneumonia and stroke and heart disease and confinement to a nursing home, and then eventually death. You just never know how long you've got. The time to learn to feel loved and be loving is right now. I digress. This is from a woman, Sally, who has been enthusiastically practicing real love for several months. She's beginning to teach two friends about how they use getting and protecting behaviors with each other a lot. And she says, I'm beginning to see how many ways people control each other. I do too. Today I saw two friends having a brief conversation, and I'm thinking of using this unloving exchange between them to illustrate their unloving behaviors. Do you think it would be a good idea? And can you tell me if my interpretation and solution are correct? Well, so far I can tell you, you're being brave and loving to approach two friends and tell them how they're being unloving to each other. That takes a lot of guts. So we're going to actually do the conversation. Sarah said, and I'm going to make my comments as we go. Sarah said to Pamela, I saved a cookie for you. They're really delicious. You must have one. If there's anybody who doesn't recognize that little manipulative ploy, then you haven't been alive for more than 2 years. People do this all the time. They like something. They say, oh, these cookies are so great. You'll love one. Here, have one. Or they'll say, I just went to a movie and I saw a movie and it was great. You have to go see it. And then 3 days later, they'll ask you if you did. Or I just read this book here, and they shove it in your face, and you're going to have to give a book report within a couple of weeks. I get books like that all the time. People like something, so they're sure that you will like it. Now, part of this motivation is actually loving. They actually care about you, and they actually think you will like it and that it will add to the happiness in your life. But part of it is to show that they have good taste. Part is to create connection, and part is to show off. Mixed motivations are everywhere. Pamela responded to the "you've really got to have a cookie." I'm really full. I don't know if I could eat more. Sarah, who is not listening at all, says, "Oh, you really have to try one. It's delicious." This is a great example of somebody not listening and controlling, and it happens everywhere. If it was just about sharing, when the other person said, "I'm full, I really don't want to have a bite," well, then if it was really about sharing and loving, her partner, Sarah, would have just dropped the subject, but she didn't. "You want one?" she said. "No? Oh, well, you really will like it." It's more like a command, not a suggestion. So you have to try one. So Pamela, who's having the cookie shoved down her throat, says, "I'm feeling really full and a little sick. This meal is bigger than I thought it would be." Sarah, who is hearing nothing by now, says, "Come on, it's really good. Just have a bit." I have a good friend who says that her Italian mother does this with every person who walks in the door. "Would you like something to eat?" That's not a question. It would be more accurate to say, "You're going to have something to eat. I am going to shovel it down your mouth, and you're going to tell me how much you love it." This is pretty persistent controlling. So now I'm addressing the friend of Pamela and Sarah. You tell Pamela that she has a role in this too. This is Pamela who's getting the cookie shoved down her throat. She's afraid to be clearer. She needs to say to her friend, because I've done this many times, and it just gets people's attention. I say, "Look into my eyes." I want to hypnotize them and make them go to sleep, but look into my eyes will suffice. "You're nice to offer, but I really don't want it." Without irritation. Her answers, Pamela's are far too tentative. See, notice she says, "Well, this meal's bigger than I thought, and I don't want one." Nope, she needs to be more direct. Sarah was still not done. So Sarah puts a piece of the cookie on Pamela's plate. I'm surprised she didn't break it up into pieces and push it up her nose. Pamela tries to hide her irritation, but clearly looks frustrated and uncomfortable. And finally, Pamela grudgingly takes a bite of the cookie. Gosh. And you could see why. There was only one way out of this that she could see, because in the household she was raised in, when somebody keeps pushing you, you just finally give in. And she needs to learn not to do that. So Pamela takes a bite. Sarah says, "That's a really good cookie, right?" Pamela says, "Yeah, it is." Disaster. So what's going to happen the next time? So, to the wise person, Pamela was afraid of Sarah's disapproval. So she was unable to clearly communicate that she didn't want the chip. Without realizing it, by not saying no, she was giving Sarah permission to keep pushing her. If we don't say no clearly, it comes across as, "Well, if you ask me a little stronger, maybe I will. Just push it a little bit more." We have to sometimes be pretty blunt. Sometimes I'll say, "Look into my eyes" with people. Sometimes I'll say to them, "What did I say the first 2 times you asked me if I wanted this?" And that really catches them off guard. Well, you said no. Still the same answer. And you don't ever have to get irritated. Sally, the coach, says, although Pamela had actually let all this happen, she felt victimized by Sarah and was irritated and resentful. Duh. Sarah, although she got Pamela to do what she wanted, surely felt the discomfort of Pamela, and that didn't feel good. Right. Nobody felt good. And nobody knew what was going on. That's the tragedy, is that we keep repeating these stupid behaviors because we don't see them. We have to have somebody like you, the wise person, Sally, we have to have somebody who points out what we're doing, or we will keep repeating what we've learned as children. So, to Pamela, sooner, clearer. When you want to say no, you have to say it clearly like you mean it and say it right away. Like, thanks, but no, I can't eat anymore. If Sarah pushes you again, you say the same thing. I can't eat anymore. If she keeps going, you say, what did I say the first 2 times? With no irritation or anger. You just calmly ask the question. If she still keeps pushing, because I've had this happen to me, you say, was there any part of the word no that was unclear to you? Because sometimes that's what it takes. Some people are just so used to getting their way. The coach says, so why repeat the same thing instead of giving justifications? Because it's no one's business what you eat or don't eat. 2, every time you justify your choices, it makes you feel small. It adds to your sense of powerlessness and builds resentment. Number 3, controllers will always find something wrong with your justification and argue with it. So why invite a fight? Pamela probably has too much fear to be able to do this yet, though, at this point. You're right. So you'll give her a chance to practice in another situation. If you're there, and you were there for this one, you help Pamela sooner to communicate what she wants, because she has to do that in order to practice being herself. She doesn't realize it, but every time she gives in to somebody else's demands, she loses a part of herself. And then eventually, she loses contact with herself. She just becomes a people pleaser and has no idea who she is. New subject. A man writes, his tendency is toward victimhood and drama. He says, when my mom died, I got some of her Christmas decorations that I grew up with. You can hear the drama building now. Mom died, Christmas decorations. I grew up with them. You can hear it just in the first sentence. Her Christmas apron that she cooked in. Dramatists add little sentimental touches, and they always use lots of words. The apron she cooked in, Santa figurines, the manger scene. I'm surprised he didn't say, with little baby Jesus in the manger. And mementos from my grandparents, like my grandfather's letter opener, snow globe. You can just see him going, the snow globe that when you shake it, the snow falls down on the little town. The brass coffee pot, drama, drama, drama. The more details you get like this, people aren't being poetic. They're building their case, is what they're doing. He continues, I will be moving somewhere in a month when this house sells. So what do I do with this stuff, or the stuff that when I look at it, I feel melancholy? The clue is in that last word, melancholy. What are you here for? You're here to be happy. So if something makes you feel melancholy, or in an unhealthy way, nostalgic, it's certainly going to distract you from the present, which is the only place that you experience happiness. He says, are these things like matches that light my drama fire? They're, yes, like matches and gas. Or am I just missing my relatives of long ago? Before you even knew what love was, because when I first met you, you had no clue at all. What could you possibly have had with these people who left behind some mementos? Couldn't have been love. So how could those memories have been good, other than that shaking a snow globe alone in your room under the stairs with a little crack of light coming in was probably safer than being out with the family and being yelled at? And what would you do with them that would enhance your ability to be present and happy now? Nothing. Not a thing. He continues, should I save pictures of the kids growing up when I feel sad looking at them? He's pretty good at answering his own questions. No. My personal recommendation is to pitch all of it out. Can't make you. I remember a man once who was just absolutely determined to change his life. His life was just miserable wreck. And it got to the point where he had to make some kind of decision, some kind of concrete decision that would change his life. Because up to that point, he'd had lots of insights, which by themselves are just meaningless. But it was time to do something. Well, he's a hoarder. And so he has his house just filled with stuff. Mementos, memories, old papers, mostly just garbage. He couldn't throw out a single item. Nothing. So he'd rather live in the past than change his present at all, and he's still living in the past, and his present is still absolutely miserable, and the chances that he'll die miserable are pretty close to 100%. So pitch out the old stuff. It's all the past. There's no reason to keep it. If you don't use something regularly, it actually costs you to have it around. Space costs you space, it costs you emotions, it costs you clutter. As I go through my garage or whatever and I pick something up and think, gosh, I might have a use for that. And the smart side of my brain says, and when was the last time you had a use for this? Because if it was longer than a year ago, you pitch it out. You throw it away. He concludes with, it's like we're trying to be a happy family, but everybody's in pain, which is the point I was making earlier, and it's just going to get worse. I'm listening to the parenting book over and over. I'm learning to be happy by asking, is it right? Is it loving? Is it responsible in the present? Oh, beautiful. You ask those questions and you'll make the right decision pretty much all the time. New subject. Recently, somebody from our group asked if I thought that someone else in the group was doing her best when she agrees to an assignment and then doesn't do it. I commonly say that I believe, on the whole, that people are doing their best. People don't choose to be miserable. They don't choose to be unloving. They just don't know how to be loving. They don't know how to feel love. So this person is saying, is the person in my group doing her best when she's given an assignment, accepts it, and then doesn't do it? The person in question has had a lot of experience with being loved, has had an intervention with you, has been to a retreat, has had access to a group. And I said yes, and I would like to be more clear before I share more with the group. Well, this is tough, so listen slow. She probably is doing her best. But then people tend to think that's the end of it. Wrong. Let's assume, for example, that I'm doing my best right now. But I'm also constantly striving to make my best better. So just saying I'm doing my best, when I'm driving a car and I keep driving in an oncoming lane and killing people, saying I'm doing my best just isn't good enough. We have to be constantly trying to make our best better. So back to your group member. If she isn't doing assignments, she needs to be held accountable so she can choose better for her benefit, not just because it annoys you. I'm doing my best is not an excuse for anybody to stay where they are. In fact, as I talk to people about making better choices, almost invariably, people at some point will say, well, but I'm trying. I believe you, and we need to keep trying more because your trying isn't getting you where you want to go. So you either need to try more or try different or something. It's not enough to say I'm trying or I'm doing my best. You continue. I've also had a lot of experiences of being and feeling loved, and I know that I'm loved by you and others, and yet once in a while, I still go back to that place of feeling hopeless and victimized and wanting someone to be wrong, fix it for me, and all that stuff. In those moments, it still feels like I can't do anything different. And I believe you. For whatever reasons, there are lots of them, illness, assault by just all the situations of life, just being tired, you lose your grip on your maximum potential. But in that moment, while you're relatively depleted or lost, you're still doing your best. You're doing your best under trying circumstances. So if you do your very best and you can pick up 50 pounds, barely, and somebody adds another 50 pounds and you drop the weight to the floor, you're still doing your best. See? You haven't lost your best. But if the goal you have is to pick up 100 pounds, well, then we have a whole lot of practicing to do, don't we? So you do whatever it takes to get back to where you were and even better, so that you fall back less far each time. You continue. Is this what you were talking about in the last video chat when you said that we're responsible for our behavior, but that it's not always our fault? Because once the pain cycle starts, you can't stop it. Partly, once we lose our grip on what's true, sometimes the fall takes on a life of its own. Watch somebody who's in the midst of PTSD. They just go nuts. And once the process starts, it takes a whole lot to stop it. Same with PCSD, same with the trauma from our childhood. So sometimes we have to utterly crash before we wake up. The better that we make our best, the less often we require a complete crash to wake up. That's why we want to constantly be improving, so that when the storms come, you want to be building your house stronger all the time. Why? So the floors will stay up, so the roof won't fall in? No. In perfect conditions? No. We want to be making it stronger so that when the storms come, then the house doesn't fall down. You conclude, if I understand it right, it seems like I remember that this would help take the drama and shame out of making a mistake. Entirely. So, do our best, make it better. Something happens, external or just internal triggering of past memory or patterns, so we make a mistake. We fall down. Then what? Then we learn. We move on to making our best better and repeat, kind of like in baking. Add, stir, repeat. It's really life is really very similar steps repeated over and over again. And the only way you lose is if you quit. New subject. This is from a divorced woman in real love. Her ex-husband is a complete narcissistic personality disorder. For short, we'll say NPD because it takes so long to say the other one. Utterly selfish, has a complete disregard for anyone but himself. So she writes and she says, Harry, her son, 12 years old, is just back from a weekend with his father, the NPD. Those times would tend to be pretty confusing for Harry, going back and forth between you, who are practicing to love him, and his father, the narcissist. You continue. As you know, his dad is a malignant narcissist who is used to bullying and ridiculing his son, and used to do that with his son from a previous marriage when the older son was about Harry's age. And it seems now that it's Harry's turn for this abuse. Well, of course, narcissists are, if anything, very consistent. You sort of got to give them credit for that. They say the same word pretty much all day long, every day, me, 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 me. And pretty much nothing distracts them. They are at least focused. You say, Harry told me earlier that on Sunday when they were all walking to a restaurant for lunch, his father, the narcissist, pushed him into a puddle of muddy water. No surprise here at all. None, because I know lots of NPDs. And I'm sure Dad thought it was just hilarious. For who? Him. Well, translate it to him, me. Me, 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 me. Without a single thought for his own son. It would amuse him, so he did it. This is just what NPDs do. You say, when Harry expressed his annoyance at being pushed and now having wet shoes and feet and being laughed at, his father told him to stop being silly. Well, again, of course, narcissists have the only true way in the life of a narcissist is their way. And anybody who doesn't agree with them is stupid, selfish, silly, ridiculous, troublesome, and on and on. One lady called me and she was describing her husband, and she had never been told that he was a narcissist. And after, 3 sentences, she was going to bring him here for an intervention. And after 3 sentences of describing him, I said, stop. I have one question. Have you ever heard him say these words? I was wrong. She said, no, actually, never. I said, poof, you have a narcissist and there's no reason to bring him because they are absolutely unreachable. She says, as you and I know, that is a true narcissist. They hurt you, but if you feel hurt, you are the problem. Oh, I know them well. They get away with a lot because people simply cannot believe that a human being's intent could be that selfish. That's one of the reasons they get away with it. We go, there's no way a father would intentionally push his son into a puddle of muddy water. It had to be an accident. No, they really can't be that selfish. So you say, what do I say to Harry and his father? Well, I can make one part of that really short for you. What do you say to his father? Nothing. That's in all caps, by the way, with big exclamation marks. Nothing will help. You have proven over, I can't remember how many years of marriage now to this narcissist, that nothing you say will ever make a difference, not even a little. You've learned that on your own. NPDs learn nothing ever. They can't ever admit even being wrong. So how could they learn anything? So don't even think about saying something to his father. And I know you have done that in the past, and you've tried, and you've justified it by saying, well, but I'm trying to, help my son to feel more loved by his father. No, don't speak to his father. But Harry's different. You've got to tell him the truth. There's that old saying, which is just stupid as dirt, that if you can't say anything, don't say anything. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Well, this is exceptionally confusing to a kid. You got to tell him all about narcissists and how they're completely selfish, and that Harry will also be nothing ever but an object to his father. His father will occasionally be nice to him, which he is, but only if there's something in it for him. So he'll give Harry gifts, for example, if Harry thanks him. He'll do things for Harry if Harry tells him how great he is. He needs to know about his father's bullying of his other son. He needs to hear more about your experiences with the narcissist. Why? Because if you don't tell Harry all about his father, he'll just get confused and think that there's something wrong with himself. And then he's screwed. You are not telling your child about his father's narcissism to get back at his father. You're telling your son about this so he doesn't feel bad about him. You continue. I feel like punching his dad in the face. Yes, I have had that feeling with a narcissist myself. I wouldn't recommend that especially. Harry said to me, I know why Dad did this. It was because there were people with us walking to lunch and he wanted to make them laugh. Tell Harry he's a genius. That's exactly why he did it. But the underlying reason is that he thinks only of himself. He wanted people to think he was funny. And if that embarrassed or inconvenienced or hurt his own son, he simply didn't care. You say, this kid knows, but how awful to be at the end of his father's madness. So before I do anything, I'm telling you so I don't make it worse for Harry by writing to my ex and telling him what I think of him. Again, do not write the narcissist. No yield. You'll wish you hadn't. So advice. I'm hopping mad and I need to calm down. Bless you, my dear. It's obvious that you love your son. And your love for Harry will save his life. His father, although supremely selfish, cannot destroy him as long as you are there to explain things to him and to love him. There's a phrase for that. As long as you are there to love and teach. No kidding. You are a great example of what we talk about here on video chats every week. You did what it took to find unconditional love. You trusted it when you got it. You remember it almost all of the time. And now here you are sharing it with your own son and literally saving his life. Way to go. You're a great example to all of us, and we can all learn to do the same. We'll see you next week.